Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Flowers in the Attic, written by Virginia Andrews. Now I recall watching the movie I think once or twice when I was a teenager, and I thought the movie was just wonderful. And it's the first time I've read the book, and I plan to read all the books written by Virginia Andrews. So I decided to start from the book that started it all, Flowers in the Attic. And I thought this book was just thrilling. It's so gripping. The characters are written so well, and I thought it was amazing that the author managed to create everything in such a small environment. I mean, they have their room, they're living in their bedroom, and then the attic. That's it. That's most of the book. And I thought it was just amazing that this book could be so great, so gripping, with just that two small rooms, the attic and their bedroom. Let's talk more about the book now. So many people out there are going to know what the plot is of this story anyway. So basically there's 4 kids. Chris, Kathy, Corey and Carrie. Chris is the eldest, Kathy is middle child, and Corey and Carrie are twins, they're the youngest. It's their father's birthday and he dies in a car crash. The mother finds out that they're in debt, quite a large debt. She just doesn't work. She hasn't got a job. And she's worried about money. So she reaches out to her parents, and we learn that she's estranged from her parents. They basically cut her off because she married her half-uncle. And her parents are very religious, and they think that what she did was against God. And so she's convinced her mother, and we find out her father, that to accept her back, to have her come to live with them. But one of the, conditions of that, she has to hide the children away. And so they hide the children in a bedroom, in a part of this huge house, this huge mansion that nobody uses. And even the servants don't go into that room, the maids and things like that. The children have access to this one bedroom. They're locked in there. And then they have access to this huge attic. The attic is massive. So that's their whole world while they're being held captive in this room, this bedroom, and the attic. This book is told through the eyes of Kathy, the middle child, and her voice is just wonderful in this book. The way she sees things, describes things, and feels things, it's so consistent and it feels so real. Everything about this book feels so real, even though the whole situation just seems unbelievable and over the top. It feels so real because of Kathy's voice. And that's just a great job by Virginia Andrews, and you can understand why this book was so popular when it was published. This book is really a psychological masterpiece. I love the character development in this story, and I love the way it explores everything through Kathy's eyes. Kathy sees all the changes going on with her older brother Chris, and also with the 2 twins, and even the changes going on with their mother when she comes to see them every now and then. She flits in, spends a few hours with them, and then flits out again, locks them in the room again, brings them presents and gifts and toys, comes wearing jewels and fancy clothes, talks about going and seeing things and doing things that they can't do because they're locked in this room. And you can see how that affects Kathy in this story and how it affects the other kids as well. And it's all through Kathy's eyes, remember. So we do get a bit of bias based on what she sees, but I think she sees things very honestly. And she describes things very honestly in the book. And I think that's quite well done because it doesn't feel like her viewpoint is biased. It feels like it's so pure and honest, and she's seeing things exactly how they are. I was totally captivated by this book, and I do think I'll read the whole series. In fact, I know I'll read the whole series. I'm not sure how many books there are in this series. I think there may be 5 or 6. And of course, then there's just a lot more books with the name Virginia Andrews on the cover. And we do know that they're not all written by her. They're ghostwritten by somebody else, but I think they're based on her notes and maybe half drafts and things like that for some of them. Kathy, who's the voice of this book, her character is just brilliant in my opinion. Her voice is so consistent. The way she sees things and describes things is just so well done in this book. I don't know if Virginia Andrews took a long time to craft this character. I read somewhere that she said it took her 2 weeks to write the book. I don't know if that's true, but I think Kathy is a masterpiece of a character. Her character growth is very strong in this book as well. And just her emotions, her reactions to things, they all feel so organic, so real. Nothing feels forced in this book. There are times when the characters go a bit over the top, and Kathy does that sometimes, but it just feels so real because you feel like it's happening because they're trapped and confined in this small environment. They're learning about the world just from books and from watching TV, because they do get a TV at one stage in the book, but they're so confined in this small little world with nobody else to interact with other than themselves. So you can see why sometimes their emotions and their reactions may be over the top, including Kathy's. Chris, who's the oldest, it's interesting to see his development as well through Kathy's eyes, and he's different in the book. So he trusts the mother, even though the mother's disappearing, locking them in this room, and they're in there for over 3 years in the story. He still trusts the mother. Kathy doesn't. Kathy comes to mistrust her, but Chris still thinks the mother is telling the truth all through the book. And that creates conflict sometimes between the siblings. So you can see differences in the kids in this story. And that was interesting as well and well done, I think, to have them with different personalities and sometimes very different. So I think Chris is very believable as a character. The only thing that's not that believable is just how clever he is, and he remains that clever even though they have nothing to read really. They're not learning, they're not going to school. So I don't know how he keeps being so clever and not falling behind when they're not going to school. Remember, they're there for over 3 years. That was the only thing I think felt a little bit weird with Chris. But everything else felt really spot on, quite perfect, and unbiased through Kathy's eyes. Corey and Carrie, the twins. Now, these are the least relatable characters in the story because their reactions are very over the top even from the start. Just the way they behave. Carrie screaming all the time and hitting people all the time, kicking, and then Corey gets involved and kicks and screams, etc. That goes on many times in the book. And I didn't even like that in this story. I thought it was a bit odd. I thought it happened too much. And I didn't know why people let that happen. I should have stopped that. If that was happening to somebody, they saw somebody screaming and carrying on and kicking and trying to punch and do things like that all the time, you think you'd put a stop to that behaviour. You wouldn't let it go on. And it seems they do. But anyway, putting that aside, they're very different, the twins. So both Carrie and Corey, even though they're twins, their personalities are very different. Corey is very quiet and he likes music and he's gifted in music and he seems to pick up instruments and just play them first time. Carrie is very loud, very brash, very vocal, very opinionated, even as a young child, even from 4 years old. And that seemed a little bit odd as well. The author was making Carrie, I think, and Corey just too clever for their age. That's what I think in this story. And I think the author was making all the kids a bit too clever for their age. That was their only flaw. But the twins, I think, are the least relatable of the kids. They're still good characters in this story, still written well for the most part. Not as good as Kathy and Chris, I don't think, in the story. And even the mother, I think, is a better character, and the grandmother. But I think more care could have been taken with Carrie especially. But her growth, her development in the book makes up for that. So she does change a bit as the story goes on. I did appreciate that development and growth in Carrie over the 3 years they were held captive in the attic and their bedroom. Flowers in the Attic is a great book in my opinion. It's not perfect, but it's almost perfect. And I can see why it was so popular when it was published, but I think it's a very, very well plotted and planned book. So carefully written. It's so clever to have it just set in 2 rooms basically, but make it so gripping and make it so thrilling and interesting. I think it's all because of the characters, especially Kathy. Her voice, her point of view, of course, creates the whole story because everything's seen from her eyes. And if it wasn't so carefully constructed, this Kathy character, I don't think this book would have worked as well. As I read through this series, I'll put a video up on my channel for each book. If you don't want to miss out on those videos, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a thriller playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.